And good morning. It's time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by Renegade River in Spring Lake. And here is your host, Mike Hewitt.
Hey, good morning. Another beautiful rainy day. What do they say? April showers bring May flowers, something like that?
No, they bring May millage votes, is what,
May millage votes.
Tax
you are
voting,
a yes
tax
vote.
increase votes.
As I recall, you are a yes vote.
I'm a no vote, but it is rainy. It's beautiful, but it's midweek. Come on. That's when you want it. We want to have the nice weekends for all those folks out there who are working hard and ultimately paying most of these taxes that we vote for. So rain today and a nice relaxing weekend for those folks on the weekend coming up.
Listen, what I want to talk about today, a handful of topics just to give you folks a little bit of a sneak preview. I want to talk about the purpose of political parties. I want to talk about Ted Cruz and how he stepped out and what that actually means for our primary process on at least
the first Republican officially announced candidate for the presidency of the United States of America.
And listen, he did it with a very unusual flair. So we'll get to that in a little bit. I also want to talk about the media and how the media just dealt with Hillary.
Oh my golly, that is shameful.
At the Excellence in Journalism meeting. It was comical.
That is shameful. Okay, yeah, that's well worth a discussion.
Yeah, that was on it. And then the next thing I want to talk about as we get into the show unravels is how President Obama snubbed the leader of NATO at a time when the NATO leader is going around talking to all of the various country leaders that are member states of NATO to say, what are we doing about ISIS and the unraveling of the Middle East? Obama was just too doggone busy. He didn't bother. And
okay.
I just find that fascinating.
Well, NATO, of course, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was originally set up as an organization of defense to protect Western Europe, this is post-World War II, from what was very clear was the Soviet Union aggression. Now, the interest in NATO has sort of faded away since the old Soviet Union is gone, but now the Russian bear is back. So, yeah.
The Russian bear is back, but NATO does more than just defend against 50-year-old ago aggressors.
Yes, it does. Yep.
It's got a pretty... And listen, here, another way of looking at it is the guy that runs NATO now is a former two-time prime minister of Norway. So we're not talking about Hillary's uncle's brother. This was someone who was an actual leader with some credibility. He left Canada after meeting with their prime minister and came to Washington, and our guy was busy. He's a very busy guy.
Well, golf is important.
Well, it most certainly is. So, and by the way, did I mention gun talk? Somewhere in here we're going to squeeze in a couple minutes about gun talk because I liked that idea. But you wanted to tell us a little bit, before we come on the air today, you started to tell us a story, Brian and I here in the studio, about Holly Hughes. What did she do?
Well, I found this fascinating. People who listen to this show, and certainly listen to either you or I individually, know that we tend to be fiscally conservative. In other words,
I'm a moderate, Jim.
Okay, well, you may very well be a moderate, but I find this interesting. Republicans and Democrats like to define themselves, or at least us voters would like them to define themselves, and quite often it's hard to discern the difference between the two. Certainly those fiscal conservatives here in the state of Michigan, the voters and activists and people who are interested in politics are quite disappointed with our current Republican-dominated House and Senate and Republican governor as they continue to expand government spending, expand government services. There's new departments of the government seem to be opening up every month. But Holly Hughes, who is a recently reelected, she was elected, I think, 4 years ago, then lost in the following election, and then was reelected just this past November, has introduced, this is according to an article in the White Lake Observer, she has introduced some bills that will cut the pension tax, and I'll come back to that in a moment, restore the property tax credit. In other words, she is looking to reduce revenue to the state of Michigan, which, if you're a Republican, that sounds like a good idea. But I've got 2 points that I would like to clarify here. the pension tax, which of course made was one of the centerpieces of Governor Snyder's tax increases, and most folks in the state, I do believe, supported it because the state was close to bankruptcy when he took over. They had a $2 billion deficit. And Holly Hughes, according to Holly Hughes, she says that $2 billion deficit in a little more than 4 years has been wiped out. So in other words, because of these tax increases and because of wise management of government, the state was able to save $2 billion. But the pension tax, which certainly many on the left have made a lot of talk about, needs a little clarification. Unless you were a government employee or a school, which of course is government of a sort, or a school employee, when you retired, in other words, if you're the rest of us, when you retired, if you had a pension, or if you had an IRA, or if you had a 401k, and you took the money out and you got that pension check, or you took the money out of your IRA or your 401k, you would pay federal tax on that income if you had an income worthy of that. And you would pay state income tax, which makes perfect sense. You've got an income coming from a pension. You're going to pay federal tax. You're going to pay state income tax. But if you happen to be a state employee or a school employee, or in some cases, I believe, county employees also, but let's look at the state level and school teachers in particular, you did not pay taxes, Michigan taxes, on your income. Everyone else did. But government employees did not. Now, somehow that seems to me to be very seriously wrong. That's certainly unfair. It's pretty clear that a very large number of the Michigan retirees were not paying their fair share. And this tax increase just simply brought up all those other folks who were getting a politically connected break on their taxes and bringing them back up to the rest of us. Okay, so there is no unfairness in this. The simple fact is that for decades, or certainly many, many years, a politically connected group of government employees.
That whole process reminded me of my dad, who used to say, if you give somebody $5 every week for no reason whatsoever, and then suddenly miss it, you're going to be a son of a gun in that person's mind.
Yeah. If you stop giving them the benefit. Well, anyway, and clearly this was a tax increase that people like myself say, well, I'm not fond of tax increases, but I'm not against at least fairness here. It would have made more sense to me to not tax at the state level anybody's pensions. But if you're going to make a change, make it for fairness. Well, anyway, Holly Hughes, ostensibly, she tells us that she's a Republican, says that I want to, according to the article, cut the pension tax. Now, it's not clear in the article whether it's going to be going back to the way it was before, but simple facts are that the way it was before is bad for the state of Michigan. But here's my real point. What Holly Hughes, Republican, is saying is, and I think you got to take her at her word, that the Republicans who've been in control of the state of Michigan, almost total control for the last 4 years and continue to do so, have been so astute in their management of the state that they've been able to save $2 billion. They got rid of the budget deficit, and they've been able to save it and bring it to clear. Well, at the same time, Holly Hughes, who was very supportive of our governor and is a Republican, again, Republican House and Senate, also supports this massive, massive tax increase. And the sole reason for the massive tax increase to fix the roads is because they don't have the money in order to fix the roads. Now, if in fact we've just saved, in less than 4 years actually, $2 billion, would it be unreasonable to assume that going forward there would be $2 billion to be saved going forward just simply by not spending it in frivolous ways?
One thing I've learned about politics, in fact, I just recently gave a little spiel on this, talking about one of the benefits that we have is we can slow the navigation speed and listen. So what we'll do, because I don't know enough about the background facts of that, I literally don't, but my answer to it is I'm going to reach out to Holly and get her on the show and have her tell us.
I think that would be great.
I think that's the best way because I just don't. I like Holly a lot. By the way, I endorsed her. And I don't disagree with your presentation. So for me to try to get those two worlds to the best way is to say, Holly, sit here and tell us what it is, and because she's a very reasonable person.
Well,
so let's see what she says.
I think it's irresponsible because remember Holly Hughes and Jeff Hansen
for
and
me to
others.
Invite her on, or
No. I think it's irresponsible for any elected official today in the state of Michigan, because everyone agrees our roads and our bridges need work. I think it's irresponsible for anyone to suggest at the same time that they're supporting a tax increase to suggest tax decreases.
Do you carry a firearm?
I do not carry a firearm, but I do have a concealed carry permit.
So you can carry a firearm?
If I'm so inclined, yes.
What kind of firearm
legally
do you own? You own firearms,
well,
right?
if I was to carry, the one that I would carry is a Ruger 9mm.
A semi-automatic.
Semi-automatic.
Some people have problems with the slide. Trying to two things actually.
I'm actually one of them who does have a problem with the slide because of my hands.
A fair number of people with semi-automatics have a tough time with two functions on that type of gun. The first is pulling the slide back, and for folks that are not familiar with firearms, the action of pulling the slide back advances a projectile or a round bullet up from the magazine and into the chamber for firing, and it also cocks the gun. And so if you're using it for personal defense and have, whether it's hand issues or just a general lack of strength, that may not be the right gun to carry. The other problem that folks have with that type of firearm, a lot of folks, maybe especially older folks, have a tough time loading the magazine itself. It's spring-loaded, so you put a bullet in and you got to push very hard. You get the next one in, now you have to look for finger strength and dexterity. And a lot of those folks, I try to counsel into an old wheel gun, as they affectionately refer to it, a revolver. Have you ever shot a revolver?
Yes, I've got a couple of revolvers.
So you have a lot of guns, Jim.
Oh, I'm armed and dangerous if I'm interested. But actually,
you're one of those right wingers the left is always talking about with guns and all that, aren't you?
Well, in our previous show, in the Talkin' Muskegon show, we were talking about the gal who was armed and dangerous and certainly utilized her protective device, which was a pistol of some sort, when she didn't get bacon on her burger, and she shot at the McDonald's. I'd say she's a little more dangerous than I was.
One of the things you listed, and I'm glad you brought that up, though, one of the things, because I was listening to that segment of the show while I was driving up to the station.
This morning from 8 to 9 o'clock, Talkin' Muskegon.
Yep, I was on my way up to do this show, and I was listening to that show, and you'd mentioned one of the charges against her. Do you recall what that was?
Well, again, according to the article, she faces charges of, quote, carrying a concealed weapon.
Right, without a license.
Well, it didn't say that. I'm just reading what was specifically written in the article. Okay. Carrying a concealed weapon, discharge of a firearm in or at a building, and then the final one was felony firearms, which, again, I don't know what felony firearms means, but perhaps you do.
I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to tell you that write this in stone, but that typically suggests that they believe a firearm was stolen. And the reason I'm bringing this whole topic up, because I wanted to get into a gun, just a short gun segment today. In fact, it started when I was looking at the then and now pictures from 1955 to 2015 in a show we did a few weeks ago. And one of the pictures that when I was going through all of that process was a picture. In fact, I even talked about it that day on the air with you. There were 2 or 3 kids standing in a classroom, and one of them's holding a rifle.
Oh yeah, sure. 1955,
and they were having it was marksman's class or whatever they called it at the time, and it seems that there was a heck of a lot less gun violence when people were trained properly and had respect, and for the firearm. And by the way, the psychiatric industry wasn't prescribing psychotropic drugs willy-nilly with the idea of generating billing hours for Medicaid and et cetera, et cetera. And so I only say that because some of the past were bad things and we've done well, but some of the things we traded away, I think, were really unwise trades. And trying to pretend that we can get rid of firearms that have been around for over 1,000 years is silly. I could build one in my garage in about an hour and a half.
Well, there is the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution,
and speaking of that,
which does ensure those rights.
I'm on my list today, and if we don't get to it, it'll be next week for sure. But on my list today is the push for people wanting a CONCON, another congressional or constitutional convention, which I think just sends shivers of fear down my spine to open up the Constitution to an uber-left government that wants more power. I mean, the Constitution is supposed to be limiting them, not us. And so whenever I hear people want to open it up and let's redefine it, holy moly, that scares the bejeebers out of me. But to the gun point, and one of the things we talked about that day, by the way, was single parenting and all that. And I would bet you $5 if you did some investigation on that young lady that she is troubled, but she probably came from a single-parent family, or maybe a grandmother or somebody entirely different raised her. All of these things, they're just crushing our society. So I think sometimes we're trying to wrestle with the wrong end of the stick rather than asking the more foundational questions of how does she get to be the angry person that she is, and can we change that for society going forward with more people?
Well, I think the simple answer is, if you want to, how did she get as angry as she was? Very clearly, bacon is the answer.
There's no question.
She did not get the bacon that she needed. I do believe that maybe bacon subsidies and bacon requirements would reduce the amount of McDonald's crime.
She's entitled to bacon.
Well, she did pay for her bacon.
Folks, we're going to go to a break, and we'll be right back to talk a little bit about Ted Cruz.
Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station in downtown Spring Lake.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show with myself, Mike Hewitt. In the studio with me, Jim Riley.
Great to be here.
Jim, when we're talking about revolvers and we're talking about semi-automatics, you say you have both. You've shot them both?
Yes, I have.
Which one do you prefer?
Actually, in terms of shooting, and I think maybe at some point we'll get into the real differences, other differences, but I think it's a little easier to shoot a semi-automatic because of it has less of a kickback. At least that's my impression. But it is, as you had suggested, it is a lot more complicated, and that slide for someone, and I do have a hand issue, but certainly women and others may share this with me, that a revolver, where they just open up very easily. You can put the shells in, the bullets in.
It's the original point-and-click technology.
It's point and click. But in terms of pure shooting, assuming it doesn't jam, which has happened because I don't clean my guns as often as I ought to, the semi-automatic, my Ruger 9mm, or I have a Smith & Wesson 22 semi-automatic, those are a lot more fun to shoot.
Folks, if you're driving down the road or you're rather sitting at home listening to us on iHeartRadio.com, and by the way, that's another thing I wanted to mention today. What I found myself doing here recently, I was just outside the signal area for the station, and I wanted to hear what was going on. So on my iPhone 6, I went to iHeartRadio and listened to an entire show, which played through the speakers on my vehicle, to your point, off from iHeartRadio.com on my i6 while driving down the road. You
mentioned this to me earlier, and it's something I have forgotten. Yes, we have a limited signal, certainly at some, in particular, sometimes in the morning or in the evening. And, of course, if you're in the car, you can plug in your charger.
So to my friends in Wisconsin and my friends and family both in Nevada, who listen often, by the way, they don't have to stay at home in front of the computer.
Yes.
To get on
that
your
iHeartRadio,
iPhone 6,
great app.
It is just a great thing. So enough of that. But if you want to know the difference between a revolver and a semi-automatic, go to renegaderiver.com and you'll see pictures of both.
And maybe you'll be talking about it as time goes on, too, because there are many, many differences, and why there are very specific reasons why a police officer or an individual would want to choose one over the other.
I guarantee you something, because I like this idea. One of the things that we're going to do with this show going forward is we're going to take 5 or 6 minutes in every show, and we're going to do what they should have been doing in elementary school and teaching about gun safety.
Love it.
That's what we're going to do. So just 4 or 5 minutes every show. Back to that 1955 image with the 3 little kids with a firearm in school. It wasn't even a Pop-Tart. It was a real firearm. I'm surprised the uber left's head didn't absolutely explode all over the walls, make a mess. What did you think about Ted Cruz and his announcement?
Well, I thought it was an exceptionally good announcement. Ted Cruz, of course, the senator from Texas, and he seemed to me to have what's necessary. Of course, it's very early, but what's necessary for a candidate to win the nomination.
45 minutes of freewheeling talk. It reminds me of times when I've had the show here, and my guest couldn't show up or didn't show up, or telephone communications, and you're stuck with a microphone for 45 minutes with nobody to talk to. I got to tell you, I really applaud him for that. When you do a random, powerful speech off the top of your head, and it's because he's passionate in the things he's talking about. By the way, folks, I'm not endorsing anybody right now, but I like the things that he said.
Well, he had passion. He had charisma. Clearly, he had the charisma. But I think your point, where he spoke extemporaneously for 45 minutes, he did not have notes in his hands. He didn't have an electronic device that told him what to say.
Teleprompter with a bank of people writing in the background?
Isn't it interesting is how many times have we seen, which is kind of frightening, that the President of the United States, President Barack Obama, his technology, his teleprompter has gone out on a fair number of occasions, and he almost seems unable to speak when that happens. But this Ted Cruz, the first Hispanic American to have a serious chance to be the next president of the United States, 45 minutes without any of the extra toys. The guy is one of the, arguably, he may very well be the most brilliant, but certainly one of the most accomplished in terms of intellectual basis of anyone that we've ever seen, certainly in recent years.
The thing concerning about him is that he delivered a dose of medicine to the American electorate and said, these are the things we have to do to save America. And listen, a lot of folks don't want to do that because it's going to push them outside their comfort zone. They're going to have to push away the $5 a week that I'd mentioned my dad talked about. There's a lot of changes that we're going to have to make, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. Doesn't matter who becomes the president. At some point, the citizenry, are going to have to step up to the pump and get fiscally responsible on their own. We're going to, as a society, have to grow up and put our big boy and big girl drawers on again. We're going to have to do it. But when he stands there and actually articulates it, the uber left, that they don't want an America. They want a globalist society. So when he stands up there and says, here's 45 minutes of the things we have to do to save America so that we don't become part of some lesser group, listen, those people on the left, their heads explode.
Well, this exact same thing happened in 1978 and 79 when Ronald Reagan declared that he was going to run for public office. The conservative side of the Republican Party had a fit, and of course the leftists, the Democrats, and those on the hardcore left had a fit. But what Ronald Reagan did, which is something that really hasn't been done by either party since, he articulated a vision and he articulated the reasons why certain things ought to be done. In other words, he brought enough people in a resounding victory, but he brought people into his concepts by convincing them with facts and rhetoric and passion. And I think that Ted Cruz has started off in that mode. Now the question is, will he be able to continue to deliver?
Listen, I think he understands the right combination. Of course, there's a lot of people yelling at the radio right now saying, no, he's a right-wing extremist. Because I heard that on the media.
By some definition, he is. You bet.
You know what? To me, I saw him as a classical liberal on most issues except for foreign policy. When I say classical liberal, I'm a Jeffersonian. I am a classical liberal. And so people don't know you're a far right nut. Okay, well, I'm a classical liberal, and I've adopted most of Thomas Jefferson's ideologies. I think that they were right for America. I think that history has borne out that that's a truism, to be able to foundationally say that. But, and by the way, that's what Ronald Reagan did, and it's why so many people were on both sides of the aisle. Yes, the uber left didn't like Ronald Reagan, and yes, the folks that were in power in the Republican Party were not thrilled with giving up power, but his message of founding liberalism was really solid. It really is. Founding liberalism meaning liberty from an overwhelming or tyrannous government. Overwhelming tax, 70-some%. You go, what kind of tax is that? That's not tax. It's slavery. To say that I'm going to take all of the fruits of your labor away from you and give it to somebody else. Those things are not American foundational types of course, some people on the very left say good because America's terrible.
Well, Barack Obama said that he wanted to fundamentally change our country. And he, I believe, articulated many of the reasons and many of the things that he was planning on doing. A lot of folks, certainly enough folks for him to win very solidly 2 elections, bought into that concept. He did it with passion. He did it with a very articulate manner. And he did it with specifics in terms of what he was going to do. Of course, one of the biggest ones was he was going to provide a government-provided Obamacare. Ted Cruz, I believe, is on the same path, obviously with entirely different politics, but on the same path of communicating to America what his vision is, what it will take to bring us to a point where certainly conservatives, fiscal conservatives, believe this country ought to go to. Can I just add one other quick thing? Ted Cruz has gotten some static among certainly the left groups for when his announcement was made, the theater that he was in was all packed, and it was packed with Liberty University students. And the Liberty University said all students have to attend. And the left is saying, oh, my golly, how awful is this? Well, number one, once you attend, if you're forced to attend and you're really unhappy about it, you don't applaud and clap with wild abandon because you're unhappy. And of course, he was very, very well received. But let us not forget how almost an entire generation, perhaps even more than an entire generation of young students in American public schools, fully funded by the taxpayer, were forced to watch Al Gore's movie, Earth in the Balance. And or An Inconvenient Truth, I believe it was.
Did you watch that movie?
Yes, I did. It was a very, very certainly convincing movie. And if you had no other insight, and certainly if you were 8 to 15 or 16 or 17 years old, you thought that this made tremendous amount of sense. Much like watching those old Bermuda Triangle movies. If you only saw one Bermuda Triangle movie, you'd think, "Oh my golly, that's true."
And remember, Igor understands that Abe Lincoln was correct when he said the philosophy in our classroom today will be the philosophy in our government tomorrow. And so when he comes off with those things and rams them through our junior highs and our high schools with convincing, because all of my evidences are within this vacuum to prove only my point. So listen, let me stop both of us for a minute. A fellow named David writes on our Facebook page for the show, so even with a great candidate of their own, Democrats poised to defeat Republicans again in the presidential election. Why are conservatives such losers? And so I read that, and I've read it 2 or 3 times while you were talking. I'm trying to understand where this guy's getting his tea leaves from. I don't know that Ted Cruz will be a presidential nominee. I have no clue. But to automatically assume with a candidate like Hillary, by the way, which we're going to get to, I hope, today, I mean, when I look at the tea leaves, I can't see the future, but I flatly don't see Hilary Clinton as president of the United States. What do you think?
Well, obviously, it's very, very early, and I'm with you. I think that the forces, the powers underground, certainly in the Democrat Party, because Republicans have very little to do with picking the Democrat candidate, as opposed to the Democrat Party, which has the media and can very easily use the major media, ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, and the rest of them, to distort a Republican. The media generally, of course, leans left. They're admittedly left,
Leans,
and they
leans
are
left, like Joseph Stalin leaned a little left.
They vote Democrat. They act Democrat. They go to Democrat fundraisers. They give money to
members of the
Democrats.
Socialist Party of America. That's a little more than kind of left.
But my point is that you asked me who I think is going to win on the Democrat side. I don't believe it will be Hillary Clinton. Again, not because of Republicans, but because the Democrat power structure, if you will, wants someone else.
I'm not even, exactly that point. I'm not convinced that she'll win the primary. I'm not even thoroughly convinced that she'll stay to the end of the primary.
I would agree with you.
She's a very defective candidate. And
she's defective in some ways, and she's very, one thing that people forget, and again, when you have the media behind you, and when you have the rewriting of history, you mentioned, education, as important as education is, because you get them in their early teens, and all of a sudden you've got voters for life. But the media is rewriting the entire Clinton 8 years as if it was almost the Camelot lie of the Kennedy years.
Yeah, they do a great job at that. One of the things I was thinking about while I watched Ted Cruz's speech, I thought this guy doesn't realize it maybe, or maybe he does, that he's not just the first guy on the Republican side or any side to announce his official candidacy rather than an exploratory committee or some nonsense. The guy's jumped in full steam, but what he's done is he's jumped out in front of that media train, because anyone that remembers presidential politics at all knows that Ronald Reagan didn't have to deal with a whole bunch of hard left cable news 24/7 channels looking for ways to destroy a person. So, and what I'll get at by comparison, if you remember in the last presidential primary for the Republicans, the media, the uber left media, picked our front runners each time. They'd say, okay, now this guy is the new front runner for the GOP is this guy, and then they destroy him. And when they got done destroying him, and by the way, many people on the right, voters bought into what the uber left were telling them as a media. So they destroy a guy, then they say, okay, this guy's the new front runner of the GOP, and then they destroy him. They did it 5 or 6 times in a row to the point where it got to be comedic. It was over the top, silly. It got so blatantly obvious, and yet many of the electorate, the folks, voters, both sides, would swallow the hook each time. Every month, every 2 months, they would announce a new leader and destroy him.
You know what? As someone who voted Republican in the last 2 elections, I voted very, 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 very reluctantly. I'm sick and tired of wimps. The media is always going to attack a Republican candidate. That's not news. And matter of fact, the way they attack is usually in a very poor manner. What happens is Republicans get out, they say something, and then the next day, they apologize for it. What happened with this last election in particular, Mitt Romney, arguably the finest human being to have ever run for public office in our country, spent most of his campaign apologizing for what he had said the day before.
Not being a Mitt Romney fan,
I'm not saying it would have been a good president, but he was a very good man. But he was a terrible candidate.
He was a terrible candidate.
And Republicans like myself sat back and said, "Oh my golly, hold your nose." As Ann Coulter said, and my golly, I'd never seen better advice ever in my life. Get drunk and vote Republican, because that's what's required with some of these candidates that we end up with.
It is, but let me tell you a 60-second story just to compare to, because it's on our little small scale here in our little goldfish bowl that is the Mike Hewitt Show. I told a story. In fact, it was the story when we did the 1955 to 2015 picture, then and now. And folks, I'm really passionate about saving the American family. I really am. Throughout that, you were with me on that show, Jim, and throughout that show,
one of the best shows ever.
Listen, all jokes aside, I don't know that it was a good one or a bad one, but it's a topic that I'm genuinely, absolutely engulfed in. When people say to me, why do you do all this volunteerism? It's because I really think the American family is in trouble. I don't give 2 hoots about gay marriage. I'm looking at 97% of America and saying our marriage, the foundation for how we are raising our children, that's the key. I don't care about marriage and all that stuff. The foundation for how we're raising our families is falling apart. And that's my passion. It really is. So we got done with that show. And here's the point I want to make. I had a number of people reach out to me via Facebook and email. One of them came to Renegade River to tell me eyeball to eyeball I'm tired of you apologizing throughout your whole show. What did I apologize about? Because when I talked about single parenthood, I said I'm not attacking single parents. I'm saying that this cannot be a foundational way for any nation to go forward, to have nothing but single parents. And listen, I believe that, but I was a single parent. So while I had that dialogue, in fact, I did it in two. The other one I did was when I did the State of the Union, according to me. I talked about it at great length in that one. That's the one where I got the feedback. So one person said, I'm tired of you being apologetic. The other person, a number of people, said, you are cold-hearted. You are just a rotten, terrible person. And I bring that up now because if you were a national politician, I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, in a primary, in the general, no matter what you say, there will be people that want to destroy you for saying it and people that want to applaud you for saying it. We've become such a divisive, aggravated society that's my opinion. What do you think?
Well, I don't, I think people have got to think back into any kind of political history. Politics and religion are the two subjects that they advise us never to engage in at Thanksgiving dinner. Politics gets people emotional. I don't think, frankly, it's any different today than it's ever been. I think it's perhaps the fact that you've got social media where people who normally didn't have any kind of voice at all now have some kind of voice. Certainly when you've got talk radio and you've got cable TV shows and things of that sort, you've got the ability now to hear another side of the story. I think passion matters. I think that's been what has been lacking in the Republican Party. You look at Democrats, they get up, they raise their hands, they wave their bodies move around. They have passion for their belief, and they bring people in Republican Party. My good golly, a wax museum sometimes seems enough to put every elected Republican in front of the people.
We're going to go to a break while Jim takes his nitro tablets.
My hands are waving, baby.
We'll be right back, folks.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
And we're back with the Mike Hewitt Show, and Jim Riley and I are having a debate off the air. Is it tinnitus or tintinitis? That's the question.
That's the big question.
Nothing else in the world really matters until we've resolved that issue.
Well, if you're going to be knowledgeable enough to go out and make an informed vote, you want to be able to hear correctly.
Right, without the hum of tintinitis
and if you have
in the background.
If you have tinnitus, you may only hear the and you don't want that.
Do you think that the media, at the Excellence in Journalism gathering, do you think that they had a serious case of whatever that word is?
Well, why don't you explain what happened? Because this is shameful, and it certainly is not a surprise, but it most certainly is indicative and Exhibit A in terms of what is wrong with the American political media.
First, I would beg you, listeners, and Jim Riley and Brian Thomas, to envision this. Let's have two universes. It reminds me of the Star Trek episode when they had the good and the bad universe. Imagine two circumstances. On one hand, let's make it the left hand, you have Hillary, who's addressing the journalists and media reporters from the Excellence in Journalism, and they give her a standing ovation. She talks about the new things that she's going to do, including a new email account, and laughs. And on the other hand, you have Ted Cruz addressing that same organization. Now, what do you think the reception would be for the two different candidates for high office?
Yeah, and let's maybe get a little more specific. Hillary Clinton took the hiding of the emails, the clearly illegal personal server, her non-answers to very specific questions, and this goes back certainly even beyond the Benghazi murders of 4 Americans. She made jokes about almost all of these issues that had to do with being honest, open, and responding to questions from the media, made jokes about them, never once answered a single question, received a standing ovation, in the meeting, in this gathering, this surrounded by adoring sycophants, she says, "I'm happy, quote, I'm happy to yield my time back to you if you want to take some questions," and then left without responding to any question. There used to be a media. Certainly, the old crunched up hat Mike Royko style folks who would say, "Wait a minute, this is outrageous," and the media as a group would be outraged. And in fact, you've got this fawning group of I guess leftists. I don't know what you'd have to call them, but it is shameful. It is a profession of shame today.
What's fascinating about many of the folks that were in the room, they've been in here for a long time. These are not first-year professionals. And so when you look back in time...
And very, very wealthy, by the way. These are one-percenters in most instances.
Well, they're the contributors. They're big dough, to your point. But when you look back at their history, these are the same folks that would absolutely vehemently attack President George W. Bush because he wasn't transparent, because he... all of these exact things.
And that's the job of the media. I mean, if you want honest politicians, your only option today is to elect Republicans, because media will go after Republicans, as well they should.
So these folks are no longer media. They're an extension of the political apparatus.
They are the public relations arm. Certainly here in Muskegon we see that. They are the public relations arm of the Democrat Party.
Now listen, and I'll tell almost every other show or so this topic comes up a little bit. And I point out the fact that I'm not news. I tell you up front, this is Mike Hewitt's opinion based on current events. But with that said, you and I have both sat in these exact chairs and talked about assailed different people from both parties. So we'll look at the topic and say we don't see that as being correct, whether it was Governor Snyder or Granholm before him or President George W. Bush or Obama now. Even though we're saying up front, this is commentary, we're vastly closer to honest media and journalism than what these folks are doing.
Well, and I'll tell you, the classic example of what you're saying is truthful is that you are admitting that, in fact, you have a political bias, as am I. The national media, the MSM, the mainstream media, tells us, oh, no, we're totally unbiased. We don't even vote. We never contribute, although we find out that in many cases that's a lie.
Huge numbers.
But the reality is that when you listen to any media, there is bias. Now, when you're listening to a Rush Limbaugh, you're listening to a Mike Hewitt, you're listening to a Bill O'Reilly, you are listening to someone who's giving opinion. But when you're listening to the morning news on ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, they're telling you they have, number one, they have no bias, and this is the truth. Well, the reality is they have plenty of bias, and therein lies the issue, the difference between commentary and news reportage. As long as you understand the difference, then you can say, okay, this is news reportage. It's supposed to be unbiased. But the reality is that it's very, very biased. And we saw it with a standing ovation to a woman who says, I've been lying to you. I've been hiding. I've been stonewalling just like Dick Nixon. And I'm not going to talk to you even after the end of this discussion. And she gets a standing ovation.
To me, it's flabbergasting.
Well, it is.
But listen, what's more flabbergasting than that, it isn't her, nor is it their political arm that we call media. What's amazing to me, frankly, is that the electorate, that voters say, I like that. It's okay with me.
It says an awful lot about the people that would support Hillary Clinton,
that to me
they
is
would
dangerous.
accept that kind of evasiveness, that kind of Nixonian stonewalling.
It's dangerous.
It says a lot about the voter.
It truly is dangerous. No. And even on my little scale here, like I said, I tell you up front, I own a gun shop. I obviously have a dog in this hunt. I am conservative, and it's just news.
Now, Jim, we know you're biased.
Yes, I am. I'm very biased.
And you're also biased about how to say a certain word. We have a caller.
Oh, here we go.
We have a Joe on the line to correct you on how to pronounce.
Oh my golly,
your
let's
word.
go for it.
Joe, are you there? Hello.
Oh, he's listening on the delay.
He's on. Okay. Well, when Joe gets back to us, we'll get his explanation here, I think.
Actually, I was hearing tinnitus.
There he is.
I was hearing tinnitus on the radio.
Hello.
Now we can hear you.
I have an expert next to me, and she's telling me it's pronounced tinnitus.
It is tinnitus. Okay. Well,
yes.
Good to know.
Jim, you've been corrected again, Jim.
I'm agreeing with Jim on this one, I think.
No, you're proving Jim Jim has failed again. Jim
you know what?
Jim is perpetually flawed.
This is what conservatism is all about. We want to be corrected as long as the information is accurate. When we make mistakes, we say, hey, great, we move on. What happens too often, certainly with politicians and certainly with those on the left, when they make mistakes, they dig in. In other words, giving money to people to keep from getting married is a bad idea.
Joe,
when they're exposed, they say, we're going to keep doing it.
Joe, I got to tell you, if you could have heard the conversation off the air where he was passionately telling me I'm wrong, you would have loved contrasting that to what he just
I put the gun back in the holster. The gun went back in the holster. I did not shoot.
Joe, hey, thank you both. Thank you both for calling in.
One more time, pronounce it.
Tinnitus.
Tinnitus.
Thank you.
Must have been the ringing in your ears. It didn't sound right
to
you.
It
Thank
could
you,
be.
Joe. That's too rich. I love it. I don't think I've ever seen him blush before. He's going, I'm wrong? What
Aren't
do
you
mean I'm
lucky
wrong?
we're on the radio?
Oh, yeah. Good point.
So we're talking about the media.
Precision in language matters, and that's one of the hallmarks of Senator Cruz. And certainly,
Exactly right.
if one listens to President Obama and analyzes exactly what he says, that's a little frightening. So precision matters.
Listen,
words matter.
I think Premier Obama has been very honest all along that he wants to fundamentally transform America.
Well, that's true.
I don't think the man has ever fibbed about what his overall agenda was. So in that regard, I'd salute him. But the folks that stand back and watch her say, I'm going to be very open, I'm going to make a joke of me not surrendering government property emails, and make a joke of it, and then get standing ovations.
And get away with it. That's the problem.
People in the media, you and I in the media, me as a writer, man, I embrace the First Amendment, but it depends on honesty. To me,
you need, we just had a very minor example. Someone who said something on the air and someone else who called in with the correct information. That's what we want. We expect our media to do. And it is just so sad. Your example of how would the media have responded to Ted Cruz had he had done the exact same thing?
If
he would have been hooted and booed off the stage.
He wouldn't have been allowed at that meeting, much less get a standing ovation.
That's true too.
She mocks them, and they give her a standing ovation.
She mocks them.
Think about that.
My golly.
The disconnect of thinking is just flabbergasting.
If you want the media to do its job, elect Republicans, because they sure as heck are not doing it with Democrats.
Well, they can't. I can't be unbiased. To Brian's point earlier, it's not possible for me to talk for an hour and not have my bias and my opinion. I just can't. And I don't blame them for taking the position that they do. I just wish they'd be honest about it so that voters could say, yes, I am listening to a Democratic operative.
Yes. And many
That's
of
all
us
I
do know
ask.
that. Sadly, too many do not.
I don't know. You are.
Well, I am biased, and I'm open about it. Again, the issue, and certainly when you go to a local newspaper like M Live, their reporters are blatantly liberal.
You think they have an agenda?
I think that they sympathize with an agenda.
Remember the term yellow rag? Yellow rag, that's what it was for me. Folks, we're going to be back next week at 9 a.m. And in the meantime, take a look at RenegadeRiver.com. See you next week, folks. Bye
Be
now.
a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station in downtown Spring Lake.